More Business Briefing right now on FM News 101.
And welcome back at 5:35 Sunday afternoon here on FM News 101. We are live and local from Alpha Broadcasting's downtown studios. I know so many of you out there are mourning the loss of Joanne Austin. I feel that she was one of the biggest and best business women in the history of the state of Oregon. We've had the opportunity to interview her a number of times, not only here on Business Briefing, but on our Northwest Vine Time show. She literally wrote the check to build the Allison Inn and Spa, spectacular setting in Oregon wine country. And coming up in our next segment, I'll pay tribute to Joanne. What a great lady she was, left a lasting impression on our state, on our local community. Her and her husband, Ken, among the most generous people I've ever met, and our thoughts and prayers go out to her family. I know it's a tough weekend. We'll talk more about Joanne's passing in our next segment. We'll close out the show fittingly with a tribute to Joanne Austin. Time now to talk accounting and taxes, though, first with Michael Lortz from Geffen. We had Michael on last weekend to talk about some interesting tidbits for those of you in commercial real estate. He also has a bonus segment for us this weekend on Oregon tax credits. And for those of you with the liquidity right now to purchase tax credits in advance, boy, it is a great time to do it. I talked with Michael about that here in the studio this past week.
There are lots of Oregon tax credits. Anybody who has filled out an Oregon income tax return has probably glanced at least once at the instructions and seen that there's code after code after code that you can input on your Oregon tax return for credits. The Oregon legislature is closely looking at credits. They have trimmed some of them back. However, what we find is that there are still opportunities for folks with a bit of liquidity to use tax credits to help reduce their Oregon tax liability.
What's the most popular way to do that?
Sure. There's a couple of popular programs out there. One, which the legislature has actually ended, but there's still grandfathered projects out there, is the Business Energy Tax Credit Program. And even though projects can no longer qualify for that credit, there's a number of projects that were grandfathered under the old rules that are just now being completed. The owners of those projects don't have the tax liability to use the credits for, and so they are allowed to sell those credits to buyers who are interested. So those buyers, some of whom are our clients, are able to essentially prepay their Oregon taxes at a discount. And this is why you've got to have some liquidity, especially with that program, the Business Energy Tax Credit Program, because those are 5-year credits, which means I'm ponying up some cash today, and I'm going to get a tax credit that I use over 5 years. So just to put some numbers to it, perhaps I would spend $73,000 today, and I would get a $100,000 tax credit that I'm going to use over 5 years. I'm going to realize some significant savings, but I've got to have that cash available today to make it happen.
Interesting. Well, I think that's a great strategy for clients who do have that liquidity. And how do they find out about this? Their friendly CPA at Geffen Mesher calls them and says, hey, I've got this idea for you, or where does this generate? Who comes up with this?
Sure. In the case of the business energy tax credits, that's often the case. So, for example, we're often reaching out to our clients, letting them know about these types of opportunities because we have project owners that come to us and will ask us if we have any clients that would be interested in buying these credits. Now, there are other types of credits that you actually acquire from the state themselves. So, for example, we're familiar with the Oregon Film Office. That's the office that brings Leverage and these other television shows and movies to Portland to film. Well, that office is funded through tax credits. And the way that one works is individuals will make a contribution online. It's actually via an online auction to this fund, which is used to incentivize film companies to come here. And then those individuals receive a tax credit for having made that contribution. And for certain taxpayers, particularly those that are paying alternative minimum tax, the dreaded AMT, which, by the way, is still out there, that particular program can be very beneficial.
Michael Lortz joining us from Geffen Mesher. If you'd like to contact him, direct line is 503-445-3368. These tax credits, I mean, for most clients out there that you work with, business owners, real estate owners, how many people have the liquidity to actually make that happen? Because I think it's intriguing to be able to do this, but how many people are liquid enough to make that happen?
Yeah, good question. So some of my clients are liquid enough to buy those 5-year credits. However, I've got a good chunk of them that are not, or they're just not willing to take the risk that they can predict their incomes for the next 5 years. For those clients, they're really more apt to buy these 1-year tax credits, like the film credits I just mentioned. And there's also some energy credits that are very similar to those film credits. In that case, you don't have to be that liquid, because what you can do is once you buy the credits, you could perhaps start reducing the withholding that's coming out of your paycheck, or perhaps you could reduce the quarterly tax payments you're making, so you can start recouping that investment, that cash, very, very quickly.
Okay, and the key here is you buy this in advance then. So it's not something where you can do a look back or anything like that and say, gosh, I'd like to retroactively buy some tax credits. You have to get them up front.
Yeah, for most of the tax credit programs, that's true. So, for example, those business energy tax credits, if you purchase them at some point during 2013, you can use them beginning with your 2013 tax return.
Okay.
Now, programs like the film credit are a little more time specific. There's an auction in early July, and if you miss out on participating in that auction, you'll probably not have an opportunity to buy those types of credits.
Okay.
So you've got to know when those auctions are happening, and there's a couple different auctions that happen throughout the year. There's very few credits that you could buy in 2013 that you could use on your 2012 tax return. There's at least one out there that I'm aware of, but it's not common.
Okay, interesting. Michael Lortz joining us from Geffen Mesher. Shifting gears to talk about the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare. Where are we at with that? Because I'm seeing some early signs that maybe the cost hikes that were projected may not happen as many had made dire predictions. What are you seeing from your clients across the board, Michael?
Yeah, what I'm seeing is probably a little bit more nuts and bolts on the ground. And what I mean by that is many of my clients are trying to decide how are they going to respond to this new program. And there's a real difference under the Affordable Care Act between employers that have 50 or less employees and those with more than 50. Because if you have more than 50, then you've got these mandates where you've got to provide a minimum level of coverage. Otherwise, you've got various penalties you've got to pay. And we can work with our clients to figure out, does it make sense to pay those penalties versus providing coverage? What I think is even more interesting is for the small businesses with 50 or less employees. They're not required to offer coverage. And the question that many of my small business clients are starting to wrestle with is, should they continue offering coverage? The subsidies that will be offered to individuals who meet certain income guidelines will enable individuals to go out and get their own coverage through these exchanges that are being set up. And with the subsidies, it may cost less than what it would cost the small business to offer the coverage. So to me, that's a critical decision point.
And that's what I'm hearing from those business owners is, you weigh the options. It's cheaper or more cost effective, if you will, to pay the hit or take the penalty, I guess, than to try to provide the medical care.
Yes, for companies with over 50 employees, that's exactly the type of analysis that they're doing. I think companies, whether they're large or small, really need to work very closely, first with the health insurance brokers, and then second, come alongside the CPAs to help evaluate the penalty part of it. But the health insurance brokers are very critical in this as well.
And again, our thanks to Michael Lortz, CPA at Geffen Mesher and a shareholder there. Not only one of the top CPAs in the entire region, but the top firms as well. If you'd like to reach out to Michael, you have a specific question about your business, and he is extremely experienced with commercial real estate, construction, and professional services. You can email mlortz, MLORTZ, at gmco.com. gmco.com. Again, MLORTZ at gmco.com. Direct line.